in 1971, Lucio Fulci gave us a glimpse into the kind of gore his films would become renowned for. His second giallo, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, is psychedelic, mysterious, and at times deranged. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So, this film is... I think I made note of it in the previous podcast. But this little section of, let's call it early Fulci brilliance, is very, very unique, I think, because I think they, especially, so Don't Touch Your Duckling, which I'll be doing next week, is unique in a different way again. But both this film, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, and Perversion Story, as discussed last week, sort of, I think they lean further towards the sort of, my apologies, the methodical nature of the murder mystery. They lean on the sleaze, but so much more of it is about sort of laying out the structure of what we're looking at. And it's interesting because in both of them, I think in tone, both of these films are less sort of fantastical than the average giallo film, I would say. And yet, in many ways, ask us to buy things that the giallo film simply doesn't usually ask us to buy. So, much like Perversion Story, this film basically gives us, not basically, in fact, actually does give us the answer to the mystery in inverted commas and shows it to us right near the start of the film. And to be honest, in some ways, is at pains to really emphasize it, but by virtue of arguably some fairly unrealistic actions from the other characters in the film, Florinda Balkan, who is Carol in the film, seems to be able to almost get away with her quite blatant actions, I think, to the point almost of absurdity. So, to dwell a little bit on that thing that I mentioned in the introduction there, that there's a real preview of gore as well in this film for what Fulci stuff would become. And I think what's really interesting about that is the tone of this film isn't gory. And I think part of the reason for that is that this is so much more about the, what would you say, just the process of unravelment, if I can coin that term. And any sort of strange images that come into this film are more, I hate the word gratuitous, but more there just for the sake of being there, I think, to one extent or another. Because, there's not really much of an explanation of that rather bizarre sort of open-hearted dog that scene. And there's a couple of other scenes that I think take place in Carol's dreams, where she's seeing some very gory images of some of the other characters. And it's so odd because without that stuff, this film really almost doesn't lean into the horror sort of genre at all, with the exception of the murder scene. So it's, what would you say? It feels like the genre has already evolved by this point, I think. I think I made mention of the idea that sorry, once again, that the start of Perversion Story was almost probably before the proper definition, right, of how of what a giallo was had really been sort of laid out. But I think by 1971 you've had The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and I think you've had a lot of other directors beginning to do it. There's a couple of Argento films that come in this year. I think the boundaries of the genre have been a little bit more defined by this point, but nonetheless, this film probably has giallo elements, and enough of them to justify that it probably is a giallo, but not so much so that it's necessarily immediately recognizable. So again, as I like to do, talk about the music, and as I mentioned pretty much every week, the music at the start of just about every giallo film seemingly really kicks you into the mood of it, you know. And look, honestly, the music in this film is just absolutely sensational, as you'd expect from Ennio Morricone. You know, right from the start, so do 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 do, and it's just it's energetic, and it's exciting, and it's mysterious, and all of those wonderful things. So quite early in the film, I think there's a lot of this. I mean, I know, in fact, that there's a lot of this that goes on in Fulci's films. I think he's on record as having said that he didn't really rate psychiatry. And he has a lot of sort of psychiatry scenes early in his films. I believe it's in The Beyond, 1981, I think, where, in fact, no, it is City of the Living Dead, I'm pretty sure, which is 1980, where one of the characters, right from the very start of that film, which turns out to be an absolute nonsensical nightmare, but nonetheless, he does sort of like a generic things that the average viewer would think about how, who doesn't know much about psychiatry would think about a psychiatrist and patient sort of relationship. And it's a lot more simplistic in that one. But in this one, the dig is at the propensity of the psychiatrist. And by the way, this isn't me commenting either way on the effectiveness of the depiction, or even whether I agree with his assessment on psychiatry. In fact, probably I disagree with it quite strongly, or at least the value of seeking that kind of assistance. But nonetheless, it is quite humorous, I think, because I think by this stage of his career, there hadn't been an established sort of aggression or pattern of anti-psychiatrist. So I think the importance behind that in this film is that you're not necessarily set up to distrust or let's say not value his opinion. So quite early, Carol is talking to her psychiatrist and talking about her dreams and stuff. And again, I think one of the hints that is just a slight hint that it's a sort of anti-psychiatry stance is the extent to which that character believes it is correct, or just how definitive he is with his analyses. Like, he's going into very, very clear stuff about what her dreams represent. It's very textbook. It's almost got a vibe of like someone who's been studying it for 3 weeks at uni or something, or college, has been reading it and like, yeah, I think I know a little bit about this. And the sort of exuberance of the confidence of this guy is just like a little bit over the top. It's actually listed here as a psychoanalyst. I guess that's the same thing. No, it's within the same thing. So she's talking about her neighbour's lifestyle, her parties, Julia Jura. And look, I think that this is such a cool aspect of this film, right? And it's why it's so important, not necessarily to the way gialli evolved, but definitely being at the front end of the cycle of these films, that this film is very much about it's like self-reflexive, I suppose, about the fact that this lifestyle is like not agreed, like sort of free sex or drugs or whatever. I think as the giallo cycle goes on, there's not a lot of characters within the films that are making note of other characters' behavior being bad, right? So Carol is in this very well-to-do family, and you know that they're well-to-do because they sit down and they're British, and they seem to be wearing, like, they have this boring dinner, and they look like they're at a restaurant or something, and then Carol's dad is there talking. He's sort of the definition of pompous, is Carol's dad. And then Frank's there, Jean Sorel, and I think I'll talk a little bit more about Frank as this goes on, but I sort of want to make the point that it's quite interesting how it goes from Jean Sorel in a perversion story where, he is sort of, I would say he's the main character of Perversion Story, or his character, but there's a certain impotence to him in that he's good looking, and he seems to have an unbelievable ability to sort of get women, and he also has a lot of money, but at the same time, the extent to which he can be fooled, and then the extent to which he's sort of taken control of by those women in his life, or one in particular, and then very nearly sent to the gas chamber. In this one, it's interesting because he's almost the same, but even less in control. So he's much less of a character in this film. He's still there, but he's very much Carol's irrelevant husband, who, like, the film's not really about him, but again, there's suspicion on him for, like, the murder at one stage, but that's like a short part of the film, and it's well and truly resolved well before the end of it, unlike the previous movie. But it's interesting because, like, he strikes me very much as like a lead character, and a lead actor. But in this film, he almost isn't. He's like nearly a lead character, or like a nearly an important character, but he isn't really. And it's just interesting use from Fulci of him in that particular way. So anyway, there's these really cool cutscenes between this sort of pompous dinner at their house, and Carol and Frank's house, and I think Frank's daughter maybe lives there, whoever she is, and they're having boring conversation. It's sort of cutting between their conversation and then what's happening at Julia Jura's house, which looks both fun and dangerous. There seems to be a lot of drug use and sex going on, and no one seems particularly with it. And it's obviously setting up as this very blatant contrast between the two lifestyles, to the point actually that I think there's actually like cut a sort of a split screen between the two at one point. And it's interesting because, like, obviously the way that this film sets itself up is that Carol is presented and sort of explained as intrigued by this lifestyle. But what I find most interesting is, outside of the dreams, in inverted commas, she's never shown in a way, in a literal sense, her actually breaking the bonds of her upper, sort of first class, high class lifestyle. Even at the very end, it's very dignified, right? Basically, it gets explained to her what she's done, and she doesn't disagree, and then she gets in the car, and that's the end of the movie. And it's interesting because I think one of the methods for this film that it uses to manipulate us, yes, but to be fair, I don't think the movie is necessarily aiming for us to be totally shocked. I think it would be happy if we are surprised by the ending, but I don't think we're going. It's thinking, wow, look at how good we are. I think it's more a matter of the very fact that it doesn't explicitly show her in this, in inverted commas, sort of degraded lifestyle, committing debauchery and all kinds of horrific things, that it sort of gives. I guess what it wants is to show the very idea of how unacceptable this was considered in this culture, and I think, and society and time, and I think that this is really the genius of Fulci in this film, and then Don't Torture a Duckling, right? The contrast between different lifestyles and ways of thinking, to the point that there is no middle ground, right? Like, and you can see the effect, right? Carol's father is. Like, he even makes comment on everything that's going on. I can't remember the exact quote, but he's just a very funny sort of presence in this film. I think, like, you're not expecting to see guys like that in future Fulci films. I don't think. I mean, I believe it's the only one of his films that sort of, not sort of, that is actually set in London. But it's like it's so. It's so unique, I suppose. So, if there's a criticism of the film, I think it's that because of this nature, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening outside from Carol feels very, not exactly like filler, but I think because of the excitement that we're given, as much as, like, say, when Frank has a discussion with Carol's dad, and he accuses Frank of being unfaithful. So, you're joking, of course. That, like, this is all relevant to the explanation at the end, but it's also so methodical. So I don't think we're made to care about Frank, and I don't think we're really made to care about anything else that's going on outside of Carol. And we've seen some very vivid and strange dreams, including naked people on a train and all kinds of bizarre stuff. And yeah, like, I just don't think we care that much about those two. But what I'll say, so I think a criticism that could be leveled against this film is the potential tokenism of, say, some of the, let's say the sort of acid-induced imagery in the film. And I can understand that, because when you consider the settings, and also the fact that a lot of that stuff happens in memories and imaginations, premonitions maybe sometimes, that you could say, well, it hasn't been woven into the story very well. But I personally wouldn't accept that criticism overly legitimately, purely because I don't think it's meant to be weaved in so much as it is meant to feel like a different world, right? So the stuff that we're seeing inside Carol's head, or reality, is so convincingly opposite to what her lifestyle is. And I guess it's that idea of the return of the repressed, right? That the more that we repress our inner desires and feelings, the more extreme will be their reaction, right? The more they'll manifest themselves in extreme ways. Not sure about the legitimacy of that psychology, but nonetheless, that was sort of the theory of the day, and it makes for some good horror movies, so I'm not complaining. So it's worth actually making a note, just that you know Frankie's having an affair with some pretty lady that seems to be in the movie, but like that doesn't even seem of any significance. Like it doesn't seem like Frank's just so irrelevant. We don't really care. It doesn't really matter from a Carol perspective because I don't know. There's just so far apart in this movie. I actually do think that's a bit of a flaw. They don't seem at all relevant to each other. So, anyway. He has an ability, or had an ability, did Fulci, to make his most memorable scene in any given movie seriously memorable. I'm thinking the intestine scene in A City of the Living Dead. I'm thinking the torture scene in Don't Torture a Duckling, and I'm thinking the fake murder dream scene in A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. This is an amazing scene. Seriously, it's an extraordinary scene. The way that the music slows down to the sense that it's romantic, right? The way that the two women are framed. Florinda Balkan's acting in this scene is unbelievable. I think there's that moment where Anita Strindberg, Julia Jura, takes her. I think she's wearing a dress or a coat. Actually, I think that's part of the thing later, part of the investigation later. There's this look on Florinda Balkan's face as that's happening, and she's being declothed. That captures like this sense of sadness that she's giving into these desires, these totally unacceptable in the conservative British, belief system, and you can see that sense of desire as well. Like the way she's not looking at her is like she's potentially trying to, avoid the reality of her feelings and her desires and all that kind of thing, or her vice, as the psychoanalyst would say. But yeah, to go from that, this sort of romantic thing, it's, or should I say, to that, it's just absolutely sensational. But then when you can have that very slow romantic stuff, and then the way the music picks up with the stabbing, and I'm not going to continue to impersonate the music, but there's that music after she stabs her, which by the way really encapsulates the horror of that. Like Anita Strindberg's acting like that, she looks genuinely terrified. I think that sometimes people being shot with their eyes open as a recently deceased person is often not very convincing. This is very convincing, and then her double take look over at the hippies on the balcony. Just the whole way this scene is shot is just unbelievable. And also I'll make note, there's just no getting around the fact that this isn't that this isn't a dream, and there shouldn't be anyway. But having those hippies in there and then just introducing them within the confines of the rest of the film, I think it's just got to be said. The only method, and it's actually quite hilarious. I love the idea because I don't actually think I was completely certain that it was her when I first watched it, other than by the time you get to the last scene and we know it's not going to be her dad probably. Well, I was never convinced by that, even though that's what the film's told us. But you can always sense when the reveal's been too early, you know. I do love the idea that upon reflection, the only possible explanation, or the only evidence the film actually offers us that it wasn't Carol that did it, is that there's a few scenes where things are happening and she's pretending like she can't believe that they are. Like when she sees the hippies. Like she starts acting in a panic, but she's doing her best to act as though she's in a panic because she can't believe they're there. Or maybe the film's doing its best to pretend that that's what she's thinking, when what she's actually thinking is, I really hope they don't see me, you know. And then like her blatant lying when she's I think sort of incarcerated at some kind of facility, and her dad comes and sees her and he just asks if she's done it. She bursts into tears and says, I didn't kill her. It's like, okay, so that's just her lying. And it's worth noting that in that moment she feels less like her character than at any other moment of the film, right? Just the way she presents herself as meek and stuff, like it just doesn't feel that convincing in hindsight. But I love the idea that this film could trick us, right? It's almost like the end of the film would be like they get the shock, right? Usually the end is meant to be shocking for us, but the shock would be, did we actually, if they saw they actually managed to trick some people with this, right? Because it's like, well, what else is the possibility? You've shown us the death, and you've tried to get us to believe that it wasn't really her, even though you've given us the information. So, anyway, so hang on. Yeah, so they eventually introduce this guy, Inspector Corvin, played by Stanley Baker, who's just a really cool actor. I don't mind that he has a thing, right? He's whistling, but the dubbing makes it unconvincing, unfortunately, right? It's just it doesn't quite play well enough for that. Also, he does it at moments that you're like, it's a bit sort of off. Like, I don't think he's as socially inept as the film's sort of trying to portray him. It's also worth mentioning Alberto de Mendoza's in this film as well, and at one point he's sort of investigating Jean Sorel, so like in a perversion story. So so there is, again, the way the film tricks us, right? I must say it seems unbelievable that Carol and I think Frank as well would be allowed into the room, like with the body still there. But that's that thing, and Carol sort of bursts in, pretending that she can't believe everything she's saying, and she does a convincing job for us, but you know, this is all a show for the police, right? And for Frank, presumably, to be like, this is unbelievable, and she's trying to think it's unbelievable, trying to pretend it's unbelievable because it's the exact same thing that happened in a dream. But it's like, well, why did it happen in a dream? You get some hilarious stuff. That guy that guy who confesses to police. Remember him? He's a little bit similar, I guess, to the hippie in the dream, the redhead. You know, these sort of hippies, and he's all, I killed her for my brother George. It's just brilliant. I just love that scene. But, you know, there's not a lot of analysis that can be done on that, I wouldn't think. You know, Carol sees the hippies while she's out with Joan, which is her daughter, as I've mentioned. And I mean, it's so risky, right? I can't remember if it's Carol or Joan's idea to follow them. In fact, I think it is. I think Carol starts following them, right? But I'm just trying to lay this out in my mind and think, is that maybe one of the flaws of the film? Because part of the explanation at the end from Stanley Baker is that, like he says to her, the one mistake you made is that you thought that they'd seen you, right? But if she thought they'd seen her, why does she follow them to... And in that explanation, she's quite shocked. But if she actually thought that, why would she have followed them back to wherever it is that they go? That weird sort of hangout that they have. Because all she's really doing is putting herself on display to see if they see her. And also on top of that, they clearly don't seem to recognize her when Joan goes up and points her out. So, yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure if that aspect of the movie is overly convincing, but that's okay. I'm probably missing something, to be fair. But I guess what's interesting, right, is that the film does seem to spend a little bit of time not pointing the finger at Carol, but displaying that she is under suspicion, which sort of, especially I think this happened in a lot of giallo films, they would give you a suspicion of someone and then often kill them, or give you a suspicion and then take that suspicion away, and that wouldn't come back, right? It would be like the most suspicious character. Like it happens like right through Don't Torture a Duckling, right? It's like that Giuseppe guy, then he gets taken away. We think it's Florinda Balkan again, the witch, then she gets killed, and then you know, so it's like it sort of ticks off all the possibilities. But what this movie sort of sneakily does is it removes her as a suspect without actually proving that she's not a suspect, which is sort of cool. And then it just sort of accuses everyone else of it until eventually it can't be anyone. And obviously, as we probably thought, we knew it was her. So I can't remember the exact moment, but it would have to be obviously within all of this section of the film, right? Between obviously the dream sequence of the murder, Inspector Corvin, as in Stanley Baker, beginning to suspect her and trying to work it out. Things beginning to fall into place with Jean Sorel and the dad, and just everything being complicated. So within there somewhere is Carol's, I think, final meeting that we are shown with the psychoanalyst, and there is a moment in this scene that is just absolutely sensational, and this is the height of this sort of, you know, double bluff that the film does, right? Of presenting Carol as panicking, presenting Carol as shocked at her dream, when in actual fact she's sort of laying foundations to try to alleviate herself of responsibility. So she's going into excruciating detail, and it's like she's almost pretending like she doesn't understand what everything is that's going on. And it's like, and this is sort of the mocking of the psychoanalyst for being too smart. So because he's analysing everything so clearly, Then it gets to and what about the two hippies, Carol says. And immediately he's like, no, they represent the something. The something that you've killed. I can't remember exactly what he says. But there's this moment, there's this subtle smile on her face. And it could be a smile of, thank goodness, there's an explanation for that. But the truth is, it's a devious one. This idiot is buying what I'm saying. He's an absolute idiot. And see, that's the sort of the more intellectual criticism of, psychoanalysts, I think, that Fulci gives, that some are idiots. Again, this is just my interpretation of what I think he thought. Some are idiots, and some know so much that they don't actually know. And it's like this, the issue with this psychoanalyst, who should have actually been able to work out quite obviously that it was her. He is so ready to explain everything without delving into it, to sort of provide himself or her with any proof, that he's just given her this ridiculous alibi, right, by suggesting that hippies represent something, when the truth is they were actually there and this actually did happen. But the point is, her acting in that moment is just, it's just sensational. That look on her face, because it's almost the only moment in the entire film, I'm sure there are others, but I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, where she's actually presented as a bit of a psychopath. Everything else is methodical, and, as I said, even at the end of the film, she just gets in the car and off she goes. There's no change to anything. But in this scene, it's like she's actually being highly, highly manipulative, and she's quite satisfied with her work. And so am I. I think it's just a really, really damn cool shot. So, just looking through Wikipedia, they sort of can guide me sometimes. As Carol is awaiting trial in the grounds of a maximum security or sanatorium. Okay. Not sure about maximum security, because there doesn't seem to be any security anywhere. And the redhead guy just climbs the bush. Doesn't even seem to be a fence on the outside, but whatever. This is a very, very effective scene, right? Because, well, look, I don't think that if there's an idea in this film, or if, and I'm not sure about this, but if the film is trying to make us believe perhaps that the redhead and the Afro girl aren't actually real, because she's Carol's crazy or something, I'm completely unconvinced by that. I'm entirely unconvinced by that. But so he sort of chases her back inside, and then we see the dog experiment thing, and Carol sees it, and she passes out with shock or something, I suppose. She wakes up and there's a weird doctor guy there. They try to convince her that there was no redhead, and I don't think we believe that. And look, as I say, I'm not actually sure we are meant to believe that. But there's a subtle genius in this scene about the fact that she sees the dogs. And for a start, the guy that we see, he just doesn't look trustworthy. He's sort of this older guy with a very stern-looking face. And his explanation for Carol having not seen that, I believe he also says that, she shouldn't have gone in there. And it's like, what the hell are they doing to those dogs? And can I say, that is a damn hard scene to watch, because it's so damn convincing, right? And on that, did you know that Lucio Fulci, along with the special effects guy, I think it was, had to actually go to court to prove that that wasn't real? There's a bit of cannibal Holocaust stuff going on there. He had to actually go in and bring the dog props in because that's, they looked good, but maybe not that good, to prove that they weren't actually torturing dogs. So, moving on from that, just pointing out that the genius of this being there is that we now sympathise with Carol because she's been chased by the redhead. I don't think we like the redhead anyway. And she's being told, sort of gaslighted about the idea that he's not there. Although I think we believe that they believe he wasn't there. And then it's like, well, what the hell are they doing to those dogs? And so she's had this horrific experience, and we don't know if she's guilty. So I think it enters our minds that regardless of the logic of whether she's guilty or not, that we're like, well, they're not treating her very well. So we begin to support her. And I think this is such clever manipulative filmmaking. And I guess one thing I'll say about that dog thing is that if there is a moment of gratuitousness in this film, it is that because that's actually outside of the sort of psychedelic aspect of the film, right? Which makes it sort of there just for the sake of it. I mean, it uses this method it's a method, as I've just said, about why in terms of giving sympathy, but there are other methods by which they could have done that. But nonetheless, it's a very cool scene, and it really strikes to me of Fulci beginning to evolve. So, as I said, there's so many similarities between this film and Perversion Story, but there isn't really sort of gore for the sake of gore in Perversion Story. And in fact, even when death or violence is involved in that film, it's not really dwelt upon or given sort of any real degree of glory, I wouldn't say. But, nonetheless, this is a development, I guess a step up from that. So this film is more like Perversion Story than any of his other films that I can think of. But at the same time, it's got, it's dabbling in gore and horrific imagery and psychedelic and imagery. And so we see that manifest itself further in Don't Torture a Darkling. And then, it reminds me of the Gates of Hell trilogy a lot, to be frank, which, like, large portions of those films are very psychedelic and fantastical. And, it's cool that, I think, to see this little era of his films that's so different to a future one, give a bit of a preview, if you will, of some of the stuff that we'll see later. So that's really cool. Moving on, there's more discussions with Frank, and Edmund is the name of the father, apparently, and he begins to start insinuating that it was Frank. I don't know if at this point, I can't remember the order of events, but if he actually knows it's probably Carol at this point, and he's just deciding to throw Frank under the bus. But nonetheless, he's just so dodgy as a dad, right? But I'm all for that. So we move into a slightly different section of the film, and I think this next section is sort of the most muddled. And if there is one major criticism I would probably lay at this film, it's that I think there's just a little bit too much going on. It's probably 10 or 15 minutes longer than it needed to be, and especially given like the next sequence, or one of the sequences that I'm about to talk about, you feel like at times they could use their time a little bit better. So, like, she's riding a horse around somewhere. It's very pure, right? Sort of represents this innocence and purity, I suppose, riding a horse around. And there's that that music going on. I've just done another impersonation. There you go. And the hippie woman comes and talks to her, and she's got this you sort of get the vibe that she's never completely sober at any point, but she's sort of there. She's a bit dreamy, and she tells her to come and meet her at church at a certain time. So she goes there, and then there's an unbelievably long chase sequence with the redhead. As in the redhead chasing Carol. And look, I'm all for this scene as a concept, but it just drags on too much. I don't really understand why it drags on so much, because it doesn't... Well, all right, I do understand, thinking about it right now. I think it's a further method to manipulate the audience into being further and further on Carol's side, because we, as I said, regardless of her guilt or innocence, we don't like the two hippie characters. We don't like the redhead, and this lengthy scene of him chasing her. The longer it goes on, the more nervous we get. The more we start barracking for Carol, and the more concerned we get when she eventually leans on the organ and draws attention to herself. But nonetheless, I think they could have succeeded in this point without it going as long as it did. I also think it sort of loses its suspense at some point, right? So anyway, she ends up hiding in a room, and then bats appear, and she screams, and that gives attention, I suppose, to Redhead, who chases her again. They end up out on the top of the church, and he's about to stab her, and then, she gets saved by a cop or someone with a gun. So that's great, I suppose. But, yeah, I don't know. It just... Yeah, I won't dwell on any more than that. So, Carol gets rescued. He ends up escaping, and then there's a rather humorous scene where they're like, I think, redhead man, 28 to 30 or something like that. And then Alberto de Mendoza says to Stanley Baker, good thing we're not in Ireland. It's just sort of funny the way Stanley Baker reacts, like he didn't want to deal with it. It's also interesting that he did the at the start of the film, it should be illegal to kill people on a Saturday or something, and it's like this is also the sort of grizzled veteran cop thing that he does a bit. The character in the New York Ripper is very, very much like that. There's a real seen it all sort of vibe, right? Like, I'll investigate murders, but can I please not do it with my Saturday mornings, right? So that's sort of funny. But he's a very serious guy, and he also clearly wants to catch the killer. So that's cool. Somewhere eventually Joan gets killed. I can't remember if it's explained who kills her, but she has that real cool scene with the female hippie where she's throwing knives with paint on them at a canvas from like 20 meters away or something. I'm not sure if that scene's overly well developed, and there's that sexual thing that happens with the two of them, and it's like, I don't really know what we're doing here. There's already been lesbian stuff in this film, and it feels like it's sort of met its quota. And as I think I've alluded to before, there seems that there's like a bit of a quota thing that goes on. What are all the things that the audience are expecting out of our film? And this scene, that aspect of that scene anyway, that doesn't seem particularly necessary, but nonetheless, they eventually get their hands on, as in the police eventually get their hands on the two hippies, and who apparently are called Hubert and Jenny. I remember Jenny. I don't remember him ever being referred to as Hubert. And I don't mind this aspect of the film because one thing I like about Fulci is so maybe he takes sides, but I also think he's critical of every side, right? I think there's an inherent criticism of the uptight nature of Carol's family, right? They're a bit too well-to-do and a bit too boring and a bit too repressive. But then it's also an inherent criticism of the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Because these hippies are such douchebags, and because just by making the depiction of the Julia Jura lifestyle so extreme that it feels like just a natural criticism. But if it wasn't clear enough, because it is, to be fair, it's mainly glorified, I think, up till this point. Hubert, especially in this scene when they're being interrogated, is absolutely pathetic, right? He's really, really struggling. The smartasser is gone at first anyway. He needs his hit. And it sort of shows the side of it that's really, really pathetic. And then in the explanation, they're asking him about it, and he's all, he doesn't really recall anything except for a lizard in a woman's skin. And I guess I'll take the opportunity right now to talk about that, because I have wanted to talk about this title all week since the previous one episode, that is. So first, I'll talk a little bit, just briefly, I'll extend on that point of the hippies being useless. One is that Hubert goes into some detail about what acid trips are, which frankly I find a little bit embarrassing, but he talks about not being, I think he says something like you could kill someone and not know a thing about it. And so he seems to be recalling this, and that's not the only thing that he says. He says other things, I can't think of them off the top of my head. But he seems to be a bit like he's thinking of that state of mind with like awe, right at the moment. But I think the film is being critical of it, right? It's sort of like the actual words, like what you could kill someone without even knowing, right? Like it's critical. So that's a further thing about being critical of the lifestyle, and just, again, not taking sides, but being critical and often hypercritical of both sides. And I think that's really cool. So getting to the title, and do forgive me, genuinely, anyone who is going to listen to this and go, yeah, that was extraordinarily obvious. Okay? So I want to share this because I honestly hadn't really realized or thought about this before. So for a start, there is an aspect of like, oh, that's why it's called A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, right? Like that line seems to be put in because they liked the title and they wanted it in the movie to give it justification. But what is a lizard in a woman's skin, right? What are some generic things we know about lizards and women? And I mean very generic. Please don't perceive me as a sexist, but do if you must. Lizards are reptiles and thus don't have feelings. Women have feelings. Of the two sexes, they're generally acknowledged to be the more nurturing, caring of the two. So a lizard in a woman's skin, I'm not even sure if the movie is trying to do this, but so I've made note in the Deep Red podcast that I love the fact that movie just shows you the killer right in the mirror. It just does that. So clever. Well, not even clever, just like, that's something that I find cool. I love that there's clues and clues and clues, but then there's just a revelation. the title of this movie is the revelation of who the killer is. It's absolutely brilliant, right? She's pretending to be a woman, but she's a lizard, right? She's an unfeeling woman. And if you look at the end scene, she doesn't even seem to have feelings about the fact that she's being arrested and her life's basically over now, or that she's killed any of those people, or that she's manipulated everyone, right? She's a lizard in a woman's skin. There's something so unbelievably brilliant about that. And again, I hope I didn't sound like a moron for anyone who that had actually already occurred to. It hadn't occurred to me because I'd never really thought of the lizard thing from the perspective of what is it about lizards other than that they're a bit dodgy. But also, it's just because it's very much in that sort of the time growing trend of lengthy, strange, and slightly animal-related titles. Because of that, it actually felt like one of the more random titles, right? Like a lot of them seem to have this sort of excuse to be in it, to have animals in it, like, you know, the bird with the crystal plumage. It's like, yeah, but it is relevant to the story. But I'd always thought of it as just this line. They liked the title, but they didn't know how to use it, so a character says it, right? But then it's like, no, it's actually the most relevant, because none of the others, like the bird with the crystal plumage, for example, does give away, like, that's a crucial part of the story because it's where we find out stuff. But a lizard in a woman's skin is the dead giveaway of the ending, and that is so cool. I reckon that's absolutely really cool. So again, apologies to anyone who thought that. You know, maybe that was quite obvious. So then news comes through that Edmund, the dad is dead, and supposedly that's the end of the mystery, or at least it is for a little while. Yeah, it's funny because, you know, Frank's position in this film, much like the actor's position in the previous film, just becomes so redundant that there's a point in the movie where, as I said, you know, there are things put on him and he's being accused, and then that just stops, and the father just apologizes to him, and then that's it, and then he just seems completely irrelevant to everything. So for a start, and I assume that the end of the movie is next to the Thames. Is that fair to say? I don't know enough about London, but I'll go with that. But either way, next to a river, it's a really cool setting, and this, I want to say cute or charming or something, little graveyard, but that's not really the right thing to say about any graveyard. But so Carol's there at her father's grave, and it's just got to be, as I said, this is just a perfection. This is perfection. This setting for how this revelation happens. None of the dialogue or the explanation in this scene worries me too much. Like, I'm not going, wow, how amazing. But it's the progression, right? So Inspector Corvin appears there and explains to her and to us, and I think I alluded to this in the Perversion Story one, I would have talked about it in relation to that film, that when a film like this is so methodical, it gets away with being like, oh, look at how good we were, right? It's like what Psycho was attempting to do with the psychiatrist at the end, except he hadn't been built into the movie at all, so it's not convincing. But like, the method to use a news reporter at the end of Perversion Story and then have the police inspector explain it to Carol, you can sort of justify it for obvious reasons with the news reporter, but even with this one, because Inspector Corvin, as far as he knows, Carol has absolutely no idea that she's in trouble. So it's like he almost has to explain it to her, right? He almost, he explains her into the police car. And it's really cool. So he talks about the phone calls and other phone calls. There's a lot of Columbo about this, right? Just the calmness, the lack of protestation from the accused and confirmed killer. He's got everything worked out, and he was very close to having it worked out for most of the movie, and then I think it's sort of revealed that he was pretty. I think he basically had it well before. I think that. The best part of the explanation is when he tells her about the hippies and that they were on acid and they had no idea what was going on. And as I said, unfortunately, earlier in the film, with her following them, it doesn't seem to make that much sense in relation to that. But anyway, what is really good about that is he's in the first part of this film. He's really built. Of this scene, he's really built her into nervousness, right? And then he tells her that, and she seems to be panicking because it's like he's now displayed to her that he's in control of this situation, and she had been in control of everything in the movie, really, right? And see, that's the thing. It's like there is that control aspect to the film, and like she's able to get away with killing Julia Jura by being manipulative, and one suspects by being high class and wouldn't do it. She's from a good background and all that. But I guess it's something that does have to be made mention of as well, just as an extension on the idea of the sort of contrast between this very conservative versus very like too conservative and like too progressive, but that won't be the right word, lifestyle, that contrast. But the extent of the shame of it, right? Because Julia Jura was blackmailing Carol, and I think that's an aspect of the film that I think is pretty good, but it just isn't fleshed out in the most effective way. I love the idea that there is that confusion from Edmund about the blackmail towards Frank, but that the blackmail is definitely coming towards someone, and that it's not necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily a shock to us, given we've seen it, that Carol could be in this lesbian relationship, but especially because the psychoanalyst, I think, doesn't. He sort of is like the sometimes the representation, I think, of just society itself, like, because part of it, I think, is that the psychoanalyst sees her in a particular light, so it doesn't occur to him either that maybe she's in this sort of debauched inverted commas relationship, like that isn't an option in his mind, because of course she's not. But also the shame, like it was just a blackmail thing, and rather than get blackmailed by this lesbian, or even worse, have it revealed that she's doing this, and bring disgrace to herself and her family and her husband and all that, it's more important to her to kill her and get away with it. And I think within this is a bit of a subtle social commentary on the power of elites, right? I don't think it overly goes into that, but I do definitely think it's leaned upon. And some later Fulci films, like the eroticist, go into that kind of thing as well. I don't know if I'll do it, but that doesn't quite align with Italian horror. But I do love Fulci work, so I might do a podcast on that, that movie one day. But it's a brilliant sort of disarming of her, this whole scene. So yeah, all right. There's just a brilliance, I think, about the way this whole scene's put together. Like, there's this short little journey that Inspector Corvin and Carol go on through the cemetery. And, she's gone from thinking she was in control to being concerned, to realizing he knows, to just accepting her fate. And then, again, the music... it's so... Look, it's hard to describe, but there's a certain... conclusion or concludatory, I don't know, nature to how it's playing when she gets into the car, and then the butter stuff after she gets in, and that's it. And the camera sort of pans to the river, and there's a boat of people sort of in the distance, seeming to be having things pointed at them by the tour guide. And there's, to me, I don't know if this is the intention, but this is sort of how I take these last images, right? By moving it away from the specific final scene. Because the thing is, there's clearly a lot of social commentary going on in this film, but it never attempts to really expand that beyond. We don't really have a lot of grand shots in this film of things sort of away from the actual characters, right? It's quite a contrast to Don't Torture a Duckling, which I'll obviously be talking about next week. I think the way it makes... the way it sort of pans away from the situation, right? It's like, I think the film wants us to sort of be left with this lasting image of this is where it happened, but that these things are not confined just to my story, right? This is out there. So it's like it shows her getting into the car from a distance, and it pans away to the other stuff, right? I think it's sort of just trying to subtly say, this is a society issue. This isn't just a my characters in this film issue, right? Or at least the society beyond those characters within the context of the film. And yeah, I guess just a final comment on that lizard in a woman's skin thing. I think I've already alluded to it, but it would be unlizard-like, right? If she did protest, she did the thing, she attempted to get away with it, she thought she got away with it, she didn't get away with it, and then that's it. Oh well. In the car, off I go. So I guess that concludes my analysis of A Lizard in a Woman's Skin. I hope I've provided some interesting thoughts. I think I've learned a little bit about my own thoughts throughout the course of this podcast. I'm very, very excited about next week. As I've alluded to before, I was studying Lucio Fulci's films. Eventually I've moved away from that and am in the process of trying to put a book together, or certainly something grand together. And I had not returned to Don't Torture a Duckling for nearly 2 years, which is very, very uncommon for me. I put it on a few nights ago and watched it, and I remembered why it's my favourite film of all time. So there are moments in that film that that upset me beyond belief. So I hope I'm not a blubbering mess next week when I get to it. But as I say, it's my favourite film of all time, and there are moments in that film that are indescribable. So I'll do my best to describe them next week and to analyse them and talk about them. But until then, enjoy your start of 2022 and indeed your middle and end of 2022. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that this has been interesting for you. I've definitely enjoyed talking about A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, and do join me next week for my analysis of the greatest film of all time, Don't Torture a Duckling. Thanks very much, guys.